nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
more than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children, and they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Este video fue producido con la ayuda financiera de la Unión Europea.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children, and they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
Very well, we'll begin our meeting then. Good morning. We're all here together, and I'm very happy to greet you and let me offer you a warm welcome to this meeting, this virtual meeting. to the Organization of American States. Inter-American Council for Integral Development is our meeting. In commencing, let me just greet the Minister of Development from Peru, Madam Vargas, and I'd like to thank her for participating in our deliberations today. And I'd like to also thank the presenters who are here. Mr. Miguel Barreto, Mr. Lloyd Day, and Mrs. Munoz Pogosian, who will be with us this morning on this topic. Food and security, or I should say food security and nutrition in the Americas. So that we can begin our work, I would like to ask Ann Glover to give us a rundown of the persons present, and then ask the Secretary to take due note of all those delegations who connect to the meeting. Madam Roberts. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Mr. Chairman, we have on the list Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, United States, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Suriname, the Dominican Republic, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and Uruguay. 25. Thank you very much, Mrs. Roberts. Given that, I'd like to put before you for your consideration our draft order of business, CD OD 111/21. As there are no objections then to that, it is so adopted. Let's move on to our next item on the agenda: food security and nutrition in the Americas, and a follow-up to the Guatemala Plan of Action. Dear colleagues, during the last decades, our hemisphere made significant achievements in the global goal to reduce poverty, which was on the uprise for years. Social protection systems and political systems were strengthened. They were very innovative and worked towards capital development, but the historical development of the GDP at 7.7% as a consequence of the pandemic COVID-19 has to be looked at. The ambassador has lost his microphone. The chair has lost the microphone. Thank you very much, Fernando. Mike is back. As I was saying, given the consequences because of COVID-19, we've had an historical increase in the number of people who are more vulnerable now because of poverty and extreme poverty. This fact has been underscored by the World Bank, and it underscores that 2020 was the first setback in the fight against extreme poverty in one generation. Furthermore, there have been setbacks in the fight to eradicate poverty, extreme poverty, and the projections indicate that inequality also will increase in the region. This is an overview looking at various levels of poverty, to which there is the added concern of the increase of people who live with food insecurity. This is the scenario, and thus it's very important to pay particular attention to the areas that are left behind, given that the goals of 2030 in sustainable development linked to food security and nutrition cannot be overlooked, whilst Latin America and the Caribbean continue to have populations with undernourished populations. To close these economic and social gaps that are egregious because of the pandemic will require us more so than ever to make an effort geared towards providing the tools to the people who are being left behind in access to human rights and basic human rights such as adequate food. These issues have been broached and addressed by OAS members in the last few years in meetings of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, and particularly when it comes to social development, that adopted the Guatemala Plan of Action during the fourth Ministers and High Authorities meeting in 2019. In this plan, lines of action and concrete actions are defined to strengthen the institutional capacity that are responsible for policies responsible for combating poverty and strengthening social safety nets and promote regional cooperation for social development. This is through the resolution that was adopted by the General Assembly in October of 2020 on the challenges for food security and nutritional security in the Americas in the face of COVID-19 and in the framework of the Guatemala Plan of Action. This meeting aims to respect the resolution and look at the plan of Guatemala, and therefore we have representatives from important sectors who seek to guarantee food security in the region. We will share experiences and exchange ideas and try to identify policies and initiatives that have shown themselves or proven to be successful in this issue during the pandemic. Thus, I should like to invite Mr. Miguel Barreto, Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean from the World Food Program. I'd like to invite him to make his presentation. We'll look at the role of international cooperation in the policies that have been carried out very effectively to guarantee food security in the Americas during the course of COVID-19. Mr. Barreto, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Ambassador. And thank you very much for this information, this very special invitation. Warm greetings to ambassadors, all members of the OAS, as well as the distinguished colleagues on the panel. For the Social Promotion of Peru, the Deputy Director General of ICA, and the Director of Social Inclusion and Access to Rights and Equity. I would like to begin by saying that COVID-19 has affected and caused a high-risk situation in the area of food security throughout our entire region. Of course, with different crises that look to overcome local capacity, but in our region, there's a double-edged sword, double challenge. In addition to hunger and food insecurity, there is a spike in undernourishment and malnutrition. It's not only malnutrition, but obesity, and this causes a larger gap and a greater need in public health. We've had a lot of lessons that we've learned this year, as well as a lot of knowledge and ideas to continue to make progress in the response to this big challenge that we have in the region. I'd like to ask the Secretariat if, having said that, we can move on to slide number 3. Thank you very much. In the region, as far as concerns food insecurity, in the last 5 years, things have increased given the crises, conflicts, climate change, and then lastly, because of COVID-19. And this, of course, also speaks to a third of the population because of the gaps that affects people in Latin America and the Caribbean. They have been afflicted by severe or moderate food insecurity. We have surveyed many different people, 45,000 remote surveys and more than 20,000 telephone calls have been made. About 14 million people today suffer from food insecurity, severe food insecurity, only in the 11 countries that we've looked at, including in the Caribbean. And this number is many times higher than in 2020. Of course, it's improved since September. According to the surveys, we have 17 million, and of course, it's improved given the opening up after the lockdown in the region that were put in place in March to September, but things have not recovered since before the pandemic. 14 million people in February of 2021 is what we see. The subsistence level of people have been tremendously affected after the crisis kicked off, and the information that we have shows that 9% of the people we're talking about reported a total loss of employment. Nobody has worked. 80% said that they have seen a drop in their income, and this of course means that access is more difficult, not only because of a contraction that took place at the beginning of the pandemic and therefore an increase in the price of foodstuffs and a drop in income, but 20% of homes interviewed have a limited or very deficient food consumption. 7% before the survey. And homes are looking for strategies given the need to have a healthy situation, but this is in detriment to their own situation, and people have become more indebted, and they've spent their savings, and thus they have become much more vulnerable. Next slide, please. Migrants are particularly subjected to economic crisis of COVID-19, and this, of course, has increased their food insecurity. In Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, 2.1 are facing severe or moderate food insecurity, and this shows the impact of the pandemic on the mobile population, and levels of consumption are lower than the resident population, and as much as 12% of migrants are hungry in comparison to 7% of the population. This situation is generated given the high level of informal work that has been impacted by COVID-19, but international migrant flows have dropped, and we have seen returns. Over the long run, the trend could reverse and recovery could take place in the face of the crisis. This would also increase the number of migrants. Some of the data from our remote surveys in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador show a deterioration of the situation, and this, of course, is accompanied by an increase in the intention to migrate. 8% at the end of 2019 and 15% of persons surveyed shows an increase in Honduras, where we get 17%. As such, then, social protection, in point of fact, plays a very important role to protect migrants' rights, particularly those that want to stay in the country that receives them. And this, of course, can prevent some of the factors that we're talking about. But we understand that it's more difficult to get access for these populations who are en route. I was talking about the double-edged sword of malnutrition, and here we have malnutrition, obesity, and overweight as exacerbated by COVID-19. Obesity increases the risk because of people in lockdown and quarantining. Loss of employment has also increased the issue with diet. This has increased obesity and overweightness in the region, but according to what we see, the average during the pandemic, people have increased more than they've taken on more than 6 kilos on an average worldwide, and countries like Mexico have increased 7.7 extra kilos in Peru, for example. So this generates costs and productivity, and the study that we have carried out with ECLAT on this double-edged sword of malnutrition shows that in economic terms, this double-edged sword in Honduras and Guatemala was equivalent to 10.2 and 16.3% of the gross domestic product, respectively. On the other hand, the lack of access has shown what has happened in fighting food insecurity. FAO did a report as well, and this has a value of $4 per day, some of the highest in the world. And this means to say that in our region, more than 100 million people cannot have a healthy diet. The pandemic. Next slide, please. The pandemic has given rise to the greatest crisis yet. More than 144 million children have been deprived of school. Schools have closed down, and schools closed. 32 of 33 countries closed their schools, and 78 million children have not had any direct access to food programs in their schools in the region. So things could not be replaced in schools, and particularly in our case, with the programs that we have in the region, we could only get up to 40 to 50% of those who normally have food. Now, this has also increased the digital gap that we have had. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to talk about social protection or social safety net. So if we can have the next slide, please. Given this overview, in practically all countries, they adopted or expanded their social protection programs to deal with COVID-19. And undoubtedly, this is unprecedented. People have done their level best in all countries. And these programs have also had to respond to the emergency. But certain things were not considered. This, of course, has given an opportunity to have international recovery for the development and to have some cooperation for social safety nets. When we look at the schools and the closed down, governments adopted programs for food to deal with children who are hungry. Honduras, Colombia, Nicaragua, and Peru, for example, in other words, are trying to adopt in terms of managing these programs, as well as the development of other protocols and other measures. Secondly, we have also worked with the governments to guarantee that no one is left behind. For example, in Colombia, in Arauca, we have looked at some communities and we have offered some cash through social protection so as to provide the growing needs the population has, and particularly the more vulnerable populations with some of these programs. And then, thirdly, governments increase the regular social protection programs, and international cooperation has also supported some vertical expansions in the programs that they've had. For example, in Ecuador, for example, through food programs, they wanted to meet the needs, the food needs of the population. And then lastly, in our case, we have supported the new emergency programs of governments through an integrated package of services that are in keeping with specific food needs, such as in the Dominican Republic. In the analysis of the cost of the diet, we learned that the combination of foodstuffs, the most nutritious and the most accessible that could be gotten given monetary transfers for the emergency programs, has worked. Next slide, please. The efforts to strengthen national systems for social safety nets should also be combined with national food programs as well as health systems so that we can offer sustainable solutions and that have a real impact on food security and nutritional values for everybody. Now, for us, we have focused on 3 pillars for cooperation. First, social solutions for sustainable development, and in keeping with the Guatemala Plan of Action, strengthening social protection systems is crucial to get sustainable results, and that can be scaled up. And the experiences that we've had, technical assistance and other policies for social protection, for such as employment and the social protection programs that we recently mentioned, so that we have workshops and work in places like Barbados reactivates things, and this has made us a partner that can strengthen social protection programs in these countries. Secondly, social policies for nutrition can also help to deal with the double-edged sword of malnutrition. For example, we are supporting food given a larger package of strategies and interventions for health, nutrition, and education based in schools with a view to contributing to the development of human capital. In countries like Honduras and Guatemala, for example, we've strengthened programs that are much more healthy and that have been done locally, promoting a change in mentality for more healthy lifestyles. And we also have other platforms for the same. And then thirdly, the international population can spearhead and catalyze transforming knowledge. On the other hand, in the food program, we have strategies so that children can go back to school in a more safe way. And we could also have these programs in school in a more safe way. Next slide, please. The generation of the proof is very important, and I would like to underscore that we are increasingly working with our governments and partners so that we do generate evidence and we can have informed decisions for programs. For example, with the International Migration Organization, the Organization of American States, and the Institute of Migratory Policies, and the BID, we are working together to look at the current situation and the linkages between food security, climate variability, violence, and migration in Central America. And thus, this summer we should launch in the OAS something at the headquarters in the OAS. We are also going to publish a study with UNICEF for the social protection and COVID-19, where we analyze the different kinds of responses that have been used in the Caribbean and South America to support this population through national systems of social safety net programs with humanitarian actors and others for development in these countries. Next slide, please. Given this, then, we have strategic alliances to promote innovation for nutrition. For example, right now we are facilitating a dialogue between Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Peru, and Mexico, where we want to strengthen a design for social protection programs to respond to the situation and the undernourishment of the vulnerable population. We have South-South linkages with a view to promote similar programs between Haiti and Costa Rica as well. We also have these regional alliances for innovation in nutrition with the government of Colombia. And this promotes a holistic view of nutrition with a view to having nutrition as a tool to guarantee empowering the vulnerable populations with nutrition. It is multi-sectoral and will use experiences and contributions from the countries of the region. We hope to launch this with the President Ivan Duque this year. Once again, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to be here, and I'm more than willing and able for any question that might come from the floor. Thank you very much.
Pasamos entonces con el
Senor Barreto, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. We will now hear from our next speaker, who is Mr. Lloyd Day, Deputy Director General of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture, also known as ICA, and he will talk about ICA's experience coordinating efforts to guarantee food security in the Americas during the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Day, you have the floor.
Much, Mr. Ambassador. Greetings to all the ambassadors and representatives and ministers and other colleagues listening this morning. I am going to try to share my presentation right now, and we'll see how it goes. My presentation is going to be very similar, but a little different, a little more focused on agriculture. It was prepared in both Spanish and English, so I'll be speaking in Spanglish for you all, and I hope it's easy enough for everyone to follow, and the translators, for those who don't speak Spanish or English, can do the appropriate translation. So I'm going to share screen. Okay. No. I might need some help from the technical staff what to do here.
Okay, you already opened the
Ventana de la app. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Got it. All right, so you should have it.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. Every platform's different. So the focus will be on food security, but with more of a focus on agriculture. I'm trying to move the slide now. There we go. So food security in the region is not homogeneous. Some countries face some extreme vulnerabilities, while others are leading global agricultural producers. Yet they themselves have some of their own vulnerabilities that we've seen from some of the larger countries in the region. So we're going to be talking a little bit about production, a little bit about poverty versus food insecurity. I think the World Food Program discussed hunger versus obesity, so I'll just touch on that a little bit, and then a little more on agriculture vulnerability and family agriculture and the vulnerabilities of that topic. So if you look at our region, we have a very positive trade balance for agriculture. We are exporting nations. The green are exporting, and as you can see, yellow's the medium positive. And so most of the region is a very positive food exporter with a positive trade balance of $154 billion. But it's not everywhere. For instance, in Brazil, for every dollar imported, $8 are exported, but in the Caribbean and in Antigua and Barbuda, for instance, it's only 0.03. So there's some big discrepancies in the region. When it comes to poverty as well, there's big discrepancies. As you can see, it's not just poverty, but it's also malnutrition in the region. So there's 131 million poor in urban zones, only 55 million in rural zones. But as you can see, the percentages are quite different. In the rural zones where we produce food, the poverty is even higher. And so that's quite sad. And then you look at the malnutrition in a country like Uruguay, it's only 2.5%. But when we get to Haiti, it's 50%. And then in the Bahamas, as we just saw some slides, the obesity levels 30%. So it's striking the differences between different countries, and the obesity rate is something that is going to be a huge subject of the Food Systems Summit that's going to be coming up at the end of September, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. So family agriculture. 50 to 67% of the production in our hemisphere comes from family agriculture, but greater than 60 million of those jobs are created in that sector. However, 60% of those family farmers find themselves in poverty with an education of less than 3 years, 50% without access to electricity. So while they're producing a huge component of our food, they're also hungry and they're also poor. Why is that? Well, we have huge gaps. There's lack of access to infrastructure. There's lack of access to financing. There's a lack of technical cooperation. That's where we and other international organizations come into play. There's lack of education. There's lack of job security and social security. So all those things are things that the international community, the OAS, ICA, the World Food Program needs to work on. So that is the subject of this discussion and the subject of challenge for all this as we think about what are going to be the public policies that we as institutions and as governments create in order to address those massive gaps. So this is a slide. We've already seen this somewhat about where the food insecurity exists in the Americas after COVID-19. You see it's strongest in the Central America, some parts of the Caribbean, and a couple countries in South America and Latin America. What has the pandemic done? Well, there's been a fall in economic activity. There's been a disruption to commerce and to business in general around the world, and the food chain has been impacted. Other chains have been impacted much more. Viewing from many of our countries, tourism has been severely impacted. Here in Costa Rica, unemployment is 25%, underemployment is 50%. Fortunately, tourism is returning to the country, but all that has had a huge impact on food systems, where the food used to go and how it had to readjust itself, food loss and all that. That in the region has led to migration, poverty, and hunger, as we're seeing on the southern border of the USA right now. I'll go through this slide very quickly. It's really just showing that there's the decline in growth in the region, from the Eastern Caribbean all the way to the rest of the Caribbean. There's negative growth everywhere, but I think these slides might be a little old because I think the potential for recovery is getting stronger. So what has been the response of countries? As you can see, it's been pretty balanced by the chart on the right. The first is ensuring food security for the most vulnerable. The second is financial assistance to business and individuals. The third is ensuring food safety protocols, worker safety. This is something that ICA has worked very quickly on with the rest of the international community for both good agricultural practices, but also ensuring common practices that are approved for worker safety and for food safety. As we know, some countries were trying to use potential contamination of COVID in food exports, which we have been working within the entire supply chain to ensure that that would not be a barrier to trade and exports. The functioning of markets has been very important, and we think we've seen a lot of resilience in the agricultural sector, and so we've been quite pleased with that. Fourth is keeping markets open and functioning, as I just discussed. Fifth is controlling supplies to avoid speculation. We saw some of that, and that's obviously a function of any kind of shock to the system, but it wasn't too terrible in most places. And then the last component here is to stimulate domestic supply and production of food, particularly in regions like the Caribbean, which are so import dependent. How can we stimulate food production so that they both help develop the economy there, but also maybe provide for the future of supplying the tourism boom that occurs in that region of the world, which has been hit by what we would call a triple impact of COVID, of the loss of tourism, and just the economic decline. So the new context shaped by the pandemic means we need to strengthen the food production of ag products in the region and the strategic role of the Americas, which is the breadbasket for the rest of the world. We need to protect our farmers through best practices. This is something that we've done a lot with in working on food security and working on good agricultural practices and good manufacturing practices, and to make sure that production continues uninterrupted. We've developed applications, we've developed guidance, and so that's been an important component of our work. And then, of course, ensuring the proper functioning of national, regional, and agricultural markets. And so the world of Zoom, we're using a different platform here, which I had challenges with yesterday, as we all know. But the world of Zoom and of other fora has enabled our institution, our Director General, to have regular contact with ministers of agriculture in a way that we never had before. And so the Director General organized every several weeks regional meetings with ministers so that we could work on problems together. And from that came certain applications that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. But it's been very good at a regional level, but also at a hemispheric level, where we had meetings in coordination with the FAO as well. And this, at the end of the day, reaffirms the importance of international technical cooperation by working together. Another important part of our outreach has been to the private sector, working with the big companies to ensure that markets remained functioning. So we had numerous meetings with the private sector. These are just a handful of the companies that participated in our meetings to see that we could work together to achieve common goals for the food supply. The picture at the upper right is about work that we're doing on Fusarium rust in bananas, which is threatening the region for the first time. has the potential to totally wipe out the banana trade. And so we are working with donors across the hemisphere to ensure that we work on the research and investigation, the biosecurity measures, and the capacity building for farmers so that the disease does not affect their crops, which is the fourth most important and consumed crop in the world. So the input directly to the ministers from the private sector is the following: to guarantee that the food chain from inputs to the store is deemed as essential, to ensure the free flow of trade of agricultural inputs of food. And this has actually led to the reduction of some trade barriers in some of the different regions in the hemisphere. Basing trade on science is key. And we all know that science is sometimes thrown out the window when we have some domestic political issues that lead to trade disputes. This has been something very important for our countries to all agree on. This has led to the diminution of some trade barriers. Providing the health and safety training for workers has been important, and we've developed guidelines as well as applications to help our member countries be prepared for this. And as we know, this is affected from the wealthiest countries to the poorest countries, and so there's a need for technical cooperation in this area. Research and innovation is always important, and improving all issues related to sustainability, to nutrition, has been something that the private sector has emphasized, as well as is public-private partnerships, in which we are hoping to get them to invest more in the region and not just rely on governments, because governments, as we know, have fiscal challenges in this period. So part of what we've also been doing is connecting with academic expertise around the world. The lower left shows a picture of Michael Kremer, who is pioneering digital agricultural applications. He's a Nobel Prize award winner for economics, and we're working with his company, Precision Agricultural Development, in a variety of countries, Brazil, Colombia, and hopefully some others as well. On the top right, we have Ratan Lal, the winner of the World Food Prize, where we're working on improving soil organic carbon. We're only as healthy as our soils, and over the past 100 years, there's been a huge degeneration of our soils and our soil organic matter. And so we're working with Ratan Lal and many member states on a Living Soils initiative to hopefully restore the health of our soils, because with that, we'll have more productive agricultural development. And then on the lower right, we have the Director General with the Director General of the Tropical Agricultural Center here in Costa Rica, working on a local development program with food banks to deliver fresh produce to the poor here in this country. And we're also working with a host of different universities, either just North American universities, but we are working with universities across the hemisphere on sharing technical cooperation. Some examples of that have been what we're doing related to agricultural applications. We're doing supply and demand applications for Central America. We have an extension application very similar to Michael Kremer's application for sharing information through a phone to farmers and ranchers. The ability to get information and training to farmers and ranchers via cell phones is a new opportunity for all of us in order to help work much more closely, much more directly, and much more efficiently and quickly with farmers in the region. So that is something that we're working on with a number of partners from across the globe. These are some examples of the programs in which we concentrate our technical cooperation. I won't go into them, but I think it illustrates for you the breadth of what we are focusing on agriculture, working with all of your ministers of agriculture to help them and to help their farmers and ranchers address the challenges of feeding the world from this important region in the Americas. A few different actions that are highlighted here are what we're doing in the northern region with Mexico and with our Food Security Summit conferences that we're working with the entire hemisphere. I might give a commercial to the fact that we are going to have 3 seminars in the next 3 months with all of your member countries and your food systems summit point of contact in your ministries of agriculture, so that we can develop a common statement from the Americas, from the ministers of agriculture, about the importance of agriculture for this summit. Agriculture is a piece of this discussion, but it's not the only piece. But we want to make sure that it is emphasized and that our farmers, our ranchers, and our ministers have a voice in this important summit that's coming up in New York at the end of September. And so these are just some other examples of where we're working in a variety of areas with your member countries. Finally, what are the technical actions that IECA participates in? We work on the institutional strengthening of your ministries of agriculture. We work on the development of public policies, on building consensus as we go to international organizations such as those listed below, of developing the human capacity in your ministries of agriculture, but also in specific sectors of agriculture in your member states. We work with a variety of projects, about $150 to $200 million worth of projects from international donors like the WFP and other UN agencies, as well as the European Union, USAID, and other donor countries. Finally, we work in coordination with all of our member states on these international forums, and some of them are listed below: the UN Food Systems Summit, as I discussed, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, Codex, which is probably the most important. The picture at the right is a presentation trying to help throughout the hemisphere be a platform for the Food and Drug Administration in order to convey food safety measures for our member states to export into the United States of America. And so that's a huge market for all of our member countries. And so the FDA has chosen us as a partner to help get everyone up to speed on the food safety requirements. And so this is really the gist of our work. COVID has made this all the more important. These tools like we are using here today have facilitated much of this, but we rely on the cooperation and the assistance of all the member countries and all of you to help make this a priority for your nations, because at the end of the day, this is the breadbasket of the world, the Western Hemisphere, from Canada to Argentina and in the Caribbean. And so we rely on your help and your assistance to do that and to make sure our voices are heard in the international political atmosphere. So with that, I'll close and thank you very much for your time and look forward to any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Day. At this point, it is my honor to introduce and give the floor to the Minister of Development and Social Inclusion from Peru, Ms. Silvana Vargas Winstanley. She will share information with CIDI about her country's experience with its policy known as Hambre Cero, or zero hunger. Minister, you have the floor. Do we have the minister with us? Yeah, she's on the screen now. Hello, good morning. Good morning, Minister, and welcome, says the chair. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to be here, and we're very enthusiastic about sharing with you information about the work we've been doing in Peru. We have a presentation that we had prepared. I'm wondering if you could pull that up. There it is. Thank you very much. We have been bold, and we have called this presentation Social Protection and Food Security in the Time of COVID-19. And our goal is to disseminate this throughout our country. That is essentially what we're trying to add to this discussion. And with that, we hope to have an interesting dialogue, which will allow us all to think about the situation, not just theoretically, but practically as well. Let's move on to the next slide. I wanted to show you this picture of what Peru looks like based on different variables that we might focus on. If we look at the map on the left, that's the latest information we have about monetary poverty broken down by provinces in Peru. This is pre-COVID, it's from February 2019, and we're waiting for the new information that will come in, and we'll see that Poverty in Peru overall has risen by 8%, making these gaps even greater. If we look at the next map in the middle, this is a map that shows a territorial breakdown of vulnerability to food insecurity. This came from 2020, before COVID. And you can see certain similarities there in terms of the darkest colors in certain areas of the country. These areas are generally in the Andean area, in the middle of the country, and the east of the country. Then if we go to the right side, we see a map with the available information we have on COVID-19 incidents throughout the country. These aren't comparable maps necessarily. They've been built by different institutions through different methodologies. But through all of them, we can see how these indicators are different across different geographical regions of the country. It can show us clearly where we have concentrations of populations that experience multiple problems at the same time. In the Ministry of Development and Social Inclusion, which this year celebrates its 10th anniversary, we have been working on something that you can see here on the left side of the screen. This is a logic for our national policy. It's a life cycle which focuses on 5 outcomes. And this has helped us establish desired outcomes, public policies, and allocate the budget to achieve those things. The goal of this was to try to create alignment between policy goals, outcomes, and the budget that we have to allocate. The main goal of this plan is to make headway in the area of food security. If we move over to the right side of the screen, you can see how we have worked through our National Food Security and Nutrition Program in Peru for 2015 to 2021 to work with other ministers and improve the situation. We are trying to renew this plan right now. But in this picture here, you can see the interventions that we take through 3 national programs. We have the Cuna Mas program, which focuses on infrastructure and water. We have Haliwarma, which focuses on school. And then we have the Foncores program, which works through focal points to perform different functions. As you can see here, it focuses on certain age groups, it provides access to infrastructure, and all of these plans together work in areas like creating a more dynamic economy across the country, boosting business growth, launching communication campaigns to increase consumption of healthy, nutritional foods at the local level, and other goals. So this is essentially our response to the policy goal that I shared with you before. And the ministry is using food security as a focus for this. That said, the big challenge that we're facing here is to be able to reach the entire country with this. That is essentially the focus of my presentation. So when we talk about having a territorial approach, what do we mean by that? Essentially, operationally speaking, we have to go beyond certain labels in order to make progress. But for us, what this means is to see a timely confluence of efforts across different levels of government, that is the national, regional, and local governments, in order to acknowledge the particular dynamics of different parts of the country. We're not trying to impose one-size-fits-all solutions. That doesn't work. We do not want to try to create results by decree. That doesn't work either. Essentially, through this confluence of efforts, what we're trying to do is reduce inequality. And in this context, what that means is that we have to make big efforts to reduce food insecurity and hunger, which have clearly been placed on our radar once again because of the pandemic. In order to do this, We have to move from a sector-based logic to a matrix-based logic that involves other stakeholders and other areas of the government. We have to go from having an emphasis on providing goods and services or products to an emphasis that is much more based on generating well-being in the population. And of course, we have to move from conservative and moderate dynamics, which don't think outside the box and that are local in nature, to a whole set of intensive dynamics with large-scale interventions that involve the use of technology and communications, which, as we say, are here to stay. This is the logic that we propose to work with over a short period of time through this program that we're calling Zero Hunger. Zero Hunger is not a policy, it's not a social program, it's not a strategy. And I say that because this particular intervention has been designed over a very brief period of time. As you know, in just 2 weeks, we will have elections. But even with that in mind, we wanted to be bold and not miss the opportunity to move forward with our agenda and help us place our focus once again on food insecurity. That is what we're trying to do through this temporary Zero Hunger program. Let's go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to share an idea with you here. You could say, Silvana, well, if Zero Hunger is not a policy, if it's not a program, what is it? What kind of instrument is it? It's a temporary instrument which has regulations behind it. However, if I really had to sum it up, I would say that it is to work across the entire country of Peru in a coordinated fashion in the context of the pandemic and take actions to address the challenges posed by food insecurity. And we need to do this by strategically reallocating our resources in order to focus on outcomes. The Zero Hunger program doesn't come from the idea that somebody in a certain cabinet had. It's not that. As you know, as part of the 2030 agenda, addressing food insecurity is a key issue. We saw that our colleagues here today had talked about the World Food Program. They had talked about what ICA is doing, and we have the World Bank and ECLAC working on this. And all of these bodies are suggesting that food insecurity has reached alarming levels and that we, of course, need to take immediate clear actions to address this. In Peru, we have a national commitment to reach zero hunger. We also have a national platform made up of public and private sector institutions which determine state-level policies and work in a deliberate fashion in order to set priorities. Throughout the pandemic, this has been a key priority. We look at the regional experience in Latin America, where countries have implemented similar programs. We have looked at Mexico and Colombia, and we have been inspired by them. And of course, we have line 4 of the strategy that I presented to you on the previous slide. Now, Zero Hunger has 3 key objectives. We, of course, are trying to expand opportunities and build capacity with a focus on small agricultural production and family farming. But in addition to that, we try to be ambitious and make headway harmonizing the demand, purchase, and delivery of food. This is a supplementary issue, but we're not just stopping there either. We're really trying to have a territorial model that focuses on reducing poverty. So what have we done? We systematically mapped the interventions or the programs that already existed, and we looked at the budget that we had for 2021, and then we systematically map all of the programs that we've had across Peru to date, in the public sector, that is. You can see here everything that we had available. If you look at the middle column where it says interventions, you can see all of the goals that our different programs have had. You can see that we have tried to promote productive opportunities or expand agricultural production, promote ancestral crops. We try to align all of these efforts and establish that confluence that I talked to you just a little while ago. Then each one of these interventions has sectors that go along with it. And those sectors or bodies would work in order to align their priorities and reallocate their efforts in a territorial manner to reach the whole country. That's what we're trying to do here.
Siendo consecuentes con lo que explicaba hace un momento.
Zero hunger, in keeping with what I said, part of this is to look at geographic focus using various indicators as we showed in the initial maps from the standpoint of a diversified workforce and one that takes place over time. Diversified because we are looking at the supply, but also looking at the demand, which is not the same in the east or in the northern or in Lima, the capital. And furthermore, we are looking at a gradual approach with regard to the interventions. And of course, as a result of this analysis, we are working with 4 territorial poles distributed, as you see on the map, in the northern sector, the center, south, the west, and in the southern area, which takes up about 188 districts altogether, I should say, and allows us to focus on these interventions in the various areas, bearing in mind the dynamic that is underway in these areas. Next slide, please. Alongside territorial distribution and the approach that we have, this is a picture. The only thing that we're trying to do is to show how on each and every one of the 3 objectives that I already mentioned for productive development, food support, and territorial articulation, for each and every one of the regions according to the territorial pillars, we have been able to identify some of the interventions that are underway right now and which are being implemented so that we can strengthen the results. In other words, we have been able to work in the provinces and deploying the interventions and look at the work in various sectors, which in the final analysis will strengthen the results for each and every one of the regions. Of course, as far as some of the areas, the commitment is a little bit more, but we also dialogue and look at some of the interventions that the regional governments and local governments have underway. This, of course, strengthens the synergy, and we thus hope that it will do the same for the results. Let's move on. We're getting close to the end now. Based on zero hunger and the logic and the roadmap, we have various hallmarks. A mapping of the regions that I spoke about, the earmarking of resources and additional sectors, the rates of our international cooperation with the different governments, sectoral governments, and others. And right now we are implementing zero hunger in the country based on the logic, which is laser focused on producing evidence and follow-up, which is going to give us a chance to get information and to look at some of the progress. And then our final thing is to have the design of a budget geared program, which will allow us to continue to earmark resources for learning and ongoing work, continuous work with the region, so that we can look at social protection and food security in all the areas. So of course, this doesn't end with a budget program, but there you're going to have a very useful instrument so that we can take decisions, and that will be key in the roadmap that we've established. So to round this off then, just a final word on the breakdown of the territories. We don't believe that we can continue this work without systematically committing to the role of our local governments. And here we believe that there are 5 key points that will play a role in the territorial articulation, strengthening territorial capacity. This, of course, will be complemented with the possibility of activating multi-actor platforms based on creative use of technology. But we can't just do that we have to also move on and look at the academic commitment to generate new knowledge and renewed knowledge throughout these regions. That is crucial. But none of these efforts will be enough by themselves if we don't make progress together through institutionalizing all of the efforts to generate governments and government involvement in the areas. And this is going to allow us to put together a social protection and food security web that have a lot in common in all the areas. Once again, I would like to reiterate, as I close, our own commitment to continue to work collectively from a territorial standpoint that takes into account the dynamic and the very specific features of all of our different regions. We began this kind of management for the Peru that we so love, and it takes into account our efforts and, of course, will continue to undergird and support the work that we have underway. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister, for your very valuable presentation. Let us move on then to hear a presentation by our last panelist this morning, the Director of the Department of Social Inclusion of the Secretariat for Access to Rights and Equity from the OAS, Mrs. Betilde Munoz-Bogosian, who will speak about the progress made in the implementation of the Guatemala Plan of Action, overcoming multidimensional poverty and closing the gaps in social equity. Mrs. Bogosian, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Warm greetings, Ambassador, and other warm greetings to the Secretariat, Mrs. Maria Plaza, as well as Mrs. Kim Osborne from Integral Developments. Also, let me greet the distinguished speakers who spoke before me, and thank you very much for being with us in this meeting. I'd like to thank Mr. Barreto, Mr. Lloyd Day, and Mrs. Winstanley from Peru. Thanks also for this opportunity, and for all of you permanent representatives from different missions who are with us here today at the OAS. I support the efforts that member states have to make progress in social development in the region, and particularly looking at the work that we have done in the follow-up program and follow-up process for economic and social progress, as well as to have adequate food. We would like to thank you for this CD meeting this morning, where we are having an opportunity to broach in a very deliberate, meaningful way and look at all of the regional efforts to guarantee food security during the pandemic. We're also having an opportunity to evaluate some of the progress in the Guatemala Plan of Action approved by member states in the 4th meeting of high authorities for development that was held in the city of Guatemala in 2019. So in addition to that, in addition to the more far-reaching decisions that were taken on this topic of food security and nutrition in the region, I would like to offer you a brief report on the progress made in implementing the Guatemala Plan of Action. And also, particularly, I would like to inform the esteemed missions what the state of play is, where we are, where we're going, to guarantee what we can get done by the next Social Development Ministerial meeting, which will be held in the Dominican Republic in 2022, with very specific results and achievements. As you will remember, the Guatemala Plan of Action was crafted in a advisory and consultation process amongst member states of the OAS. The countries got this plan and use it as a blueprint where specific activities and actions are defined for the commitments that are in the political declaration, the Inter-American Declaration of Priorities, when it comes to social development adopted during the aforementioned ministerial meeting. And as we've already pointed out at other times, the adoption of this plan is really a hallmark in the history of ministerial processes in social development here at the OAS, in that it is the first plan of action adopted by member states since the ministerial meetings began when it comes to social development in 2018. The importance is also in that the plan was conceived as a tool to begin dialogue, to have an exchange of information and experience and lessons learned, as well as to promote horizontal cooperation for those who are responsible for social policies in the region, prioritizing three main lines of work. Many of them, of course, have already been referred to by the speakers who came before me. First, multidimensional poverty. Second, strengthening social protection systems. And then thirdly, promotion of alliances, financing, and technical cooperation in the hemisphere to promote social development. Now, as far as concerns some of the progress made since the adoption of the plan of action in the arenas that I just mentioned, I would like to point out the following. First, establishment of 3 working groups, which thus far include Canada, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Paraguay. And also, let me just reiterate our invitation, which we've done in other arenas in CD, and let me just launch this and hope that other countries will form part of this group. Secondly, we had the first regional virtual workshop moving towards social inclusion of people who have to deal with trafficking of persons. This was on the 10th and 11th of November 2020, and it was organized alongside the IOM, the International Migration Organization, and it was also linked to the work line in the Guatemala Plan of Action that refers to strengthening systems for social protection with an integral approach, including people in human resources. And for the first time, we have representatives from the ministries and the other entities responsible for social policies, with representatives from the different round tables against trafficking to work and express and offer insights on the problems and the vulnerabilities that are involved with people who are in trafficking, and then look at how social policies can also be a tool for their real social inclusion. The specific result, the workshop, was called Proposal for Regional Guidelines for Social Inclusion of People Involved in Trafficking in the Americas, and there are some guidelines for member states as well in terms of designing and implementing policies in this area. We hope that this proposal with guidelines will also be adopted and will be useful for member states in the OAS, in as much as it is a contribution for all social groups that are very vulnerable in our societies. And here we're talking about people who are living through this scourge. So we are coordinating precisely with the Secretariat for Multidimensional Security, particularly the Department of Citizens Safety, Public Safety, and doing our level best to have this document known in the arena of the political dialogue of the Secretariat. I would also like to speak about crafting a plan of action. There's a proposal for that for 2020-2021, which is drafted by the Inter-American Commission of Social Development, CD, and spearheaded by the Secretariat and the Government of Mexico and the Ministries of Social Development of Paraguay and Guatemala, in the hands of the Vice President. And then the troika of the social process is Guatemala, the Dominican Republic, and others, and they also participated very actively in crafting the proposal. Here I'd like to stop and also reiterate our commitment to social development. We will do our level best, and we're grateful for all of the efforts that have been made, so that despite all of the challenges we have in the face of COVID-19 pandemic and the changes in the context of work, today we do have a proposal for the plan of work, which is in keeping with the reality, and a timeline so that we can secure implementation of the plan of action of Guatemala, and thus we will have it for the next ministerial. Let me just also point out that some of the activities we're thinking about in the proposal for the plan of action are designed to strengthen institutional capacities of all of the civil servants who work in the ministries and those involved in social policies. Activities were designed in keeping with how poignant these issues have so that we can underscore social policies and also bearing in mind some of the challenges because of COVID-19. So that with that, we hope that all member states will use the plan of action and will avail themselves of the host of different activities that will move towards institutional strengthening. Let me also underscore holding a planning meeting of the Intergovernmental Ministerial Authorities. This took place on the 23rd of February. And also, let me just say that at that meeting, the Secretariat worked with the government of Mexico and promoted a proposal for the plan of action, which will be used by all of the authorities. Member states of the OAS are invited to follow that meeting, and right now the work proposal has been circulated to all delegations for your perusal. Our expectation is that this proposal will be approved soon and adopted in the different policies in the council so that it will tally with the chair of that committee in the hands of Delegate Giovanni Reed from Barbados. I would also like to speak about the virtual meetings amongst the different working groups that set up the Guatemala Plan of Action. And let me tell you that the leadership of the working group coordinate virtual meetings with their members in April and May. That will be coming up so that they can delve into the details as to how they're going to implement a lot of the activities that they have mapped and that they have made relevant in each of the work groups. So that to conclude then, let me just briefly speak about some of the challenges that we have in implementing the plan of action of Guatemala. Now, as far as concerns the challenges, the most important, of course, for the moment continues to be the issue that has to do with budget constraints. We remember that member states approved a voluntary fund to finance a lot of the activities under the Guatemala Plan of Action. Then last year, the GA approved a resolution linked to the topic of this CD meeting today called Challenges for Food Security in the Americas in the face of COVID-19. We would like to invite member states and other members to contribute to the fund so that we can make some progress in implementing the plan of action. Thus far, we've received no contribution to the voluntary fund, although this year virtual activities will be a priority. Workshops and webinars and so on and so forth are the virtual activities. And then we'll continue to move that agenda forward with the results, minimal results at least, for some of the work that will take place, and so that we can have participation in as many countries as possible. Another challenge that I alluded to briefly earlier, and that we'd like to map as key, is the need to have the participation of countries in the working groups. And particularly, we invite the Caribbean countries to participate. Not only can they benefit, but they can also add value to all of the undertakings when it comes to these three working groups. And then lastly, we truly believe that in this context in which the region is living, where inequality has been referred to because of the pandemic, it's more necessary than ever to have regional cooperation. We have to have cooperation amongst countries, and in this regard, then we feel that the Guatemala Action Plan is a tool to facilitate dialogue and regional cooperation amongst countries, but also with other partners, international partners who are here with us today. And especially when it comes to strengthening alliances so that we can boost all of the efforts being made by the organization. So given the challenges of the pandemic, we also have an opportunity to strengthen the social development agenda within the OAS. And to strengthen everything that is being done for social development with the ministers and to boost all of these efforts that will come up with specific results, concrete results that generate and add value to the institutions that are responsible for social policies, and that in the short, medium, and long term improve public policies that more recently affect the life of the most vulnerable populations in our countries. On that point then, I should like to conclude, and I thank you for the opportunity to present my points. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Director, for your presentation. As the panelists have already mentioned, who are with us here today, one of the most serious consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic is the increase of people who are living in food insecurity in the region. Thus, now I should like to give the floor to delegations to make their comments on this. But before I give you the floor, I'd like to ask that your comments be very concise. Limit yourself to 5 minutes so that the invited guests will also have time to chat with member states. Thus, let me give the floor to delegations. The floor is open to delegations who might like to make comments. Honduras is recognized. Honduras has the floor. Thank you very much. We'd like to thank the panelists for their presentations today. And we have the presence of Maria Valladares, who right now is a subsecretariat for Vida Mejor program in the Secretariat for Development and Social Inclusion in Honduras. Engineer Valladares is a master in managing forest resources with the geographic information and remote sensors. She has far-reaching experience in agriculture, climate change, socioeconomic development, management of natural resources, and scientific research. With your permission, then, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to give the floor to our esteemed Subsecretary, Mrs. Valladares. Thank you very much. Welcome, Vice Minister. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and the Inter-American Committee for Integral Development. Warm greeting to all member states, and thanks to all of you presenters for your presentations. The national context of food security of Honduras has been severely affected since March 2020 because of COVID-19 pandemic, and also in November 2020, given the natural phenomena Eta Iota. Given this situation, and in some of the missions that we had in December to March 2021, about 2.9 million people, represent 30% of the population in Honduras, are in a food crisis. In other words, they live in homes that have some deficiency in food energy consumption. So about many people are in a state of emergency and they require interventions, urgent actions to be taken. Most are in 3 of the 18 departments of the country. And let me say, it's Cortes and others. The most affected population is the one that depends on tourism, commerce, business, and industry, particularly in the urban areas and the peri-urban areas that at first flush have affected production because of the spread of COVID-19. It has limited access to markets and of course generated the loss of employment, both formal as well as informal. Now, the preliminary estimates for 2020 and the Central Bank of Honduras with regards to the pandemic indicates that the contraction of the GDP in nominal terms could be between $1,400 and $1,700 million. Now, alongside that, we have the hurricane Eta Iota, which also had a hard effect on the population and led to a lot of loss, both in the productive sectors as well as in the roadways and in social equipment, in health networks, and also in land and air transport, with estimates, according to ECLAC, of about $200 million. Now, with regards to this context, then, we have had a host of different budget changes and programmatic changes to guide responses throughout the country. And this, of course, has focused on 3 main pillars. First, the mechanism for immediate response that allow for access to foodstuffs for the emergency and hard-hit populations so that we can fill in the gaps and also to save lives. This, we've zoomed in on geographically on those groups that are most vulnerable. This is multidimensional, and thus activities that focus on handing in food and with cash transfers. Thus far, we have handed in more than 500,000 food baskets with basic grains and other foodstuffs that have allowed us to generate this first line of access for people who are in an emergency situation. We've also done this through activating other areas where people work together for hot foods and other food baskets, mainly in these departments that are most hard hit and are living in an emergency situation. Now, with regards to the cash transfers and the non-monetary transfers, this has been done through different means. For example, we have different bonuses, as it were, which are geared toward workers whose businesses have been affected because of the pandemic, and also it has allowed them to have inputs from the market so that they can have access to foodstuffs. We also continue with delivering the other vouchers for schools so that we can also guarantee a source of income for these families and consumption of foodstuffs for the children. We also activated another voucher for the emergency to support families that were most hard hit in terms of their wherewithal, but this has also been tremendously because of COVID-19. We have another intervention strategy which is geared towards supporting the population in recovering their immediate needs, getting back on stream, and in the areas affected by Iota and the hurricanes, we have given special attention or paid special attention. So here we continue to deliver humanitarian packages with the basic domestic needs to help these families get back on stream with a recovery plan, a national recovery plan, which has been able them to look at and do better. Efforts have been made in terms of getting roads back to running well and also building homes for those families that have been hard hit. And thirdly, very important, efforts have zoomed in on economic recovery so that the most affected populations can find opportunities for employment and have some kind of income. So in this regard, we have had more than 200 families that have taken on educational or financial education. This has been very relevant and has been studied by the University of Los Angeles, where the preliminary results have shown us that those families that were hard hit and that have been part of this educational process for finance during the pandemic not only had greater response in the face of the pandemic, but also their monetary poverty indices changed and they were better off economically. This was a very significant result. Also, for 2021, we are now reorienting resources through different institutions where we are investing more than 1 million lempiras in this area of financial education and handing over capital to families as well as input to strengthen financing in homes and to help small and medium-sized enterprises. Thank you very much.
La viceministra Marian Valladares por su participación.
Thank you very much to the Vice Minister for her participation today. Thank you, Ms. Valladares. I now give the floor to Camila Oviedo Bautista. Go ahead, Mr. Oviedo. Fernando, do we have Mr. Oviedo? He is taking a minute to come in. Mr. Oviedo, if possible, could you please refresh your browser and request the floor again? And we'll see if we can fix the problem that way and get you to appear on the screen. Hello, can you hear me? Yes, go ahead. Hello, good morning. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to partake in this event, which is of the utmost importance. A very good morning to all. Ambassador Luis Cordero, Chair of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development. On behalf of Javier Maya Rodriguez, our Secretary of Well-Being, and the Government of Mexico, we send you warm greetings. Ministers and high authorities of social development, permanent and alternate representatives, my friends, we would like to thank the Secretariat for Access to Rights and Equity for inviting us to this meeting to talk about the recent actions taken by the Government of Mexico in its capacity as the chair of the Inter-American Committee on Social Development. Mexico took over as chair of CITES as part of the work of the fourth meeting of the Inter-American Committee on Social Development, which was held in November 2017 at the OAS headquarters in Washington, D.C. Since that time, Mexico has made the commitment to strengthen dialogue between member states with the goal of supporting the design of policies and the development of actions to forward social development cooperation, and particularly to fight poverty and inequality that are hitting our hemisphere particularly hard. The fourth meeting of ministers and high authorities of social development, REMDES in Spanish, was held in March 2019 in Guatemala City. On that occasion, the ministers of social development of the OAS member states adopted the Guatemala Action Plan for 2019, Overcoming Multidimensional Poverty and Closing Gaps in Social Equity, moving towards an Inter-American Social Development Agenda. The Guatemala Action Plan is a very relevant roadmap, and it helps guide us in implementing policies, actions, and activities in ways that will help us to continue moving towards the eradication of poverty, the reduction of inequality, the expansion of social protection, and hemispheric cooperation to drive comprehensive and inclusive social development. The goal of this plan is to set out activities in harmony with the Guatemala Declaration that the member states will be performing up until the fifth meeting of ministers and high authorities of social development, which will take place in the Dominican Republic next year. In order to implement the Guatemala Action Plan, the Mexican government has worked alongside CITES and Troika authorities, as well as the Technical Secretariat, to hold several virtual meetings and include a 2021-2022 work plan for the first time. We recently presented this at the planning meeting that Betile Munoz referred to. We presented it to CITES authorities and coordinators of the working groups. This took place on February 23, 2021. The plan was accepted by the member states, and its main goal is to make the commitments adopted in the declaration approved at the fourth meeting a reality. In order to make headway implementing these commitments, the working group proposes a set of specific actions that will allow us to organize joint efforts among member states to build an Inter-American Social Development Agenda. This Inter-American Agenda will provide long-term objectives and priority action lines. It will be established by OAS member states in order to guide policy dialogue and inter-American cooperation on social development. 3 working groups under the leadership of CITES have been established to set out specific activities, and Betile Munoz already referred to these 3 working groups. So I just wanted to say that the activities proposed in the plan will depend on the availability of financial and technical resources available for that purpose. We would also like to reiterate that the General Assembly held in June 2019 established a voluntary contribution fund, which is called Fund for the Implementation of the Guatemala Action Plan 2019. Observer states, OAS member states, or other institutions can make contributions to this fund in order to finance the activities established in the plan and the activities that are prioritized in the 2021-2022 work plan. My friends, currently in our region, we are facing the most serious crisis that we have seen in decades as a result of COVID-19. As we all know, this has had serious health, social, environment, economic, and social consequences. COVID has magnified the structural problems associated with the development model in our region. We have seen greater poverty, deficient healthcare systems, deficient social protection systems, low productivity, low export diversification, low fiscal margins, and food systems that are failing people and the planet in many ways. Recent ECLAC estimates for our region say that in 2020, our gross domestic product shrunk by 7.7%, and unemployment was 10.7%. Alongside this, there were many more people in situations of hunger than in 2019. The number of people living in poverty is expected to rise to 45.4 million people, reaching 231 million people, and 96.2 million people will be living in extreme poverty. COVID-19 has also showed us that this pandemic could add 83 million to 132 million people to the groups that are suffering from hunger in the region. Even if we see a recovery in 2021, we would hope, or we are expecting, that future levels of hunger will be much higher than they would have been without the pandemic. The situation that we are seeing requires great cooperation and multilateralism, and our region could be an example for the world of what effective multilateralism looks like. The activities conceived in the work plan aim to create dialogue, reflection, experience sharing, and lessons learned so that each one of our member states can have more tools and more information to create a body of evidence for decision making and design and implement public policies that will allow us to work more efficiently in facing the challenge of eradicating poverty and inequality, and also meeting the sustainable development goals of the 2030 Agenda. The government of Mexico, as chair of the CIDES, is strongly committed to promoting a set of activities that are proposed in the 2021-2022 work plan, which will guide our efforts over the next 2 years. Distinguished ministers and high authorities of social development, we would like to avail ourselves of this opportunity to invite you to join the actions that have been proposed in the CIDES 2021-2022 work plan. Thank you very much. Mr. Oviedo, thank you very much for your words. We give the floor to Canada.
Good morning. On behalf of the Government of Canada, I would like to thank the panelists for their presentations. Canada believes that post-COVID-19 recovery is an opportunity to support a structural transformation in agri-food systems, including empowering smallholder farmers, especially women, to increase local production, resilience, and innovation in agri-food supply chains and agribusiness. Furthermore, we have an opening to continue to follow a twin-track approach to food security and nutrition that supports targeted policy, programming, and advocacy efforts with the greatest potential to close gender gaps. This consists of taking direct action to tackle the immediate causes of hunger and malnutrition, including nutrition-responsive programming in the immediate humanitarian nutrition response, alongside medium and long-term programming interventions that address the underlying determinants of malnutrition, including sustainable climate, smart agriculture, water, sanitation and hygiene, gender equality, and overall health programs that address the root causes of hunger, malnutrition, and poverty. Canada has announced more than $1.1 billion in funding to support initiatives addressing the devastating consequences of COVID-19 in developing countries, including specific activities to mitigate the negative impacts of COVID-19 on food security, nutrition, and livelihoods of populations, especially for marginalized or vulnerable communities. The majority of Canada's response to date has been to address the negative symptoms of food insecurity and hunger by providing humanitarian food assistance and nutrition support programs. Through Canada's funding, partners are delivering gender-sensitive food and nutrition assistance, COVID-19 adapted school feeding, and continuation and adaptation of timely and high-quality life-saving nutrition services for women, adolescent girls, and children under 5. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Ambassador Wendy Acevedo from El Salvador. Thank you, Chair. We would like to express thanks for the presentations made by the distinguished panelists who are here with us today. In El Salvador, our population's well-being is one of the 3 key pillars that the government is approaching alongside economic rebuilding and security. In that context, we need to ensure food sovereignty and security. This is essential to achieve a full increase in the quality of life of our population, as well as sustainable economic development. In order to make progress on the resolution on food security in the Americas, given the COVID-19 pandemic, as part of the Guatemala Action Plan, El Salvador has initiatives that are underway. We have the Pan Cocatlan program, which involves a 2020 to 2024 development program, as well as a Growing Together policy. The goal of this is to eradicate malnutrition by focusing on the population's life cycle. We also have healthy and sustainable school food programs, as well as the master plan for agricultural improvement, which will help improve our population's standard of living. To counteract the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on food security on the Salvadorian people, the government has taken a set of initiatives. These include keeping the prices of the basic food basket stable. We ensured that basic grains were available to many people. We also boosted our deliveries of seeds and basic foods by 30%. We provided aid to households that saw their incomes affected, and this helped 1.5 million people. The Ministry of Education improved the school food program to help the most vulnerable children by delivering many school food packets. We have also built our Social Fabric program, which delivered food packages to families that were affected by the COVID-19 emergency. The Ministry of Health is working with technical support from the National Council for Agricultural and Food Support, as well as the regional program from SICA, and by working with international organizations and NGOs, we carried out an evaluation of our current and projected food security situation in El Salvador. To do this, we focused on the different phases of food security. The goal of this was to identify the population groups most affected by this and take necessary policy actions and make investments based on evidence. The Ministry of Health has also taken actions to improve aid for breastfeeding throughout the country. In 2021, we have different efforts underway to make headway in this area. We are working on strengthening our legal framework at CONASAM, which is the executive group that coordinates efforts on this issue. We have worked with the United Nations system in order to organize national multi-sector discussions on sustainable food. The goal of these discussions is to identify priorities and create a new food security and nutrition policy that will address the post-COVID situation. This would also use a multi-sector approach to food security. In order to strengthen our legal framework, we have undertaken an analysis and put several bills forward in Congress. CONASAM has worked with the Ministry of Government and Development to work jointly with other bodies to strengthen food security across the country. We will work with municipalities to do this as well. Lastly, we will work with the World Food Program to strengthen our information systems to monitor the food insecurity and nutrition situation in the country and to take national policies and initiatives to address this emergency. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. I give the floor to Ambassador Rita Sciglione from Guatemala. Go ahead. Thank you, Chair. My delegation thanks you for your leadership in convening this meeting of the CD. We also recognize the value of the presentations delivered by the different panelists and the thoughts offered today on this topic. Chair, our work here has helped support the commitment to eradicate hunger and achieve food security and proper nutrition for our region. It has also helped to follow up on the meeting held in August last year and the resolution adopted at the 50th OAS General Assembly held last year. Challenges for food security and nutrition in the Americas given the COVID-19 pandemic as part of the framework of the Action Plan of Guatemala 2020-2021 roadmap for the Inter-American Social Development System. This strengthens partnerships with agencies in the inter-American and international systems, such as the organizations that are with us today. It also helps create partnerships with regional systems in order to strengthen hemisphere-level cooperation in this area. We believe that the OAS has the influence to strengthen synergies and create collaboration between different international and regional organizations, as well as member and observer states. Mr. Chair, Guatemala is experiencing structural challenges such as the prevalence of food and nutrition insecurity. This makes it necessary for us to provide proper food in order to meet the food needs of Guatemalan families. This reality makes us one of the countries in Latin America that faces chronic malnutrition, facing many children under the age of 5. This has an effect on their development and their potential for well-being in the future. Since Mr. Alejandro Giammattei took office in 2020, he has worked to create tangible results in the reduction of chronic malnutrition and acute malnutrition across the country. And this has led to a national crusade against malnutrition, which has received support from the World Food Program and brings together all sectors in our country in order to improve nutrition in the poorest and most marginalized areas. It works with a comprehensive approach and responds to the multiple causes of the problem. Chair, President Alejandro Giammattei presented the results of an evaluation carried out by government entities as part of this great crusade against hunger. We have also put out guidelines or a guide for newborns, which was distributed across 8 regions in the country. We have sought to provide access to healthy food in rural areas and schools. We have delivered seed packages, as well as basic grains and fruits and vegetables. Through our school food program, we have worked with parent-teacher organizations to deliver foods with nutritional value that are culturally relevant to more than 2 million students. We have a program that is supported by UNICEF, which works with children in the first few years of their life. In the area of social protection, we have strengthened the nutritional system in 10 departments by providing social dining halls and programs that involve the provision of rations for families with children under 5 years old. We also have a social communication strategy, and this has led to efforts to strengthen health and nutrition in families and communities. Chair, the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as hurricanes Eta and Iota, have posed a great challenge as we try to carry out these initiatives, especially throughout the first year of the Great Crusade for Nutrition. As a result of this challenge, we saw that we had to implement mechanisms for inter-sector coordination for all levels of government, civil society, academia, and other bodies. Chair, with your permission, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Sergio Rene Gonzalez, who is the advisor for the Office of Monitoring and Evaluation of Guatemala's food program, so that he can talk about the Comprehensive Rural Development Program. This is a program that improves food and nutrition security in order to boost social inclusion and have a more resilient society that focuses on designing comprehensive service models to improve the quality of life of our most vulnerable populations. Chair, thank you. Good morning to all. Ambassador, thank you for introducing me. It's great to be here to talk to you on behalf of the Ministry of Social Development. We wanted to talk to you about our Comprehensive Rural Development Program. If we can go to the first slide, please. We have a comprehensive rural roundtable, which is made up of 9 ministries and more than 400 people. We have the support of the Ministry of Agriculture. In this program, we see the participation of the highest level authorities from our country. The goal of this is to close gaps in social inequality, especially in the areas of health, education, and employment, as well as food security and nutritional security. It has a priority goal, which is to provide community dining halls. This will be the initial phase of the program. And the goal of this is essentially that people will be able to go to a place to be able to have food. This will provide comprehensive support with efforts that are coordinated across all sectors. Next slide, please. So why should we have a comprehensive rural development roundtable? First of all, there is evidence that shows us that poverty, chronic malnutrition, and food insecurity are worse in rural areas of the country. This is mainly because the state is not present in these regions of our country. This roundtable has focused on 7 departments in Guatemala that have the lowest indicators of food and nutritional security, as well as chronic malnutrition and overall poverty. The goal of this is to implement the country's comprehensive rural development policies, starting with food and nutritional security. These are families who spend their days thinking about what they will have to put on their table. And the program seeks to provide food support for them over their life cycle. And as was mentioned, this is part of the Great Crusade for Nutrition. So let's look at how we are implementing this proposed comprehensive rural development policy in 2021. We will have an initial phase where we will set up community dining halls. This is a new strategy. The dining halls are mostly located in urban areas. And by having these dining halls, we can provide specific attention for people who have been excluded through other programs. We will also provide agricultural support for families in these communities. In phase 2, we will implement the roadmap for comprehensive care for early childhood, and we will work primarily with children under the age of 5. Moving on to phase 3, we will implement virtual basic and diversified education environments across our country. We do have primary schools, of course, but we don't have diversified and basic education environments. This will be virtual, people will work through computers, and this will help close gaps that exist in education as it provides access to new technologies. And as we saw with COVID-19, that is a key route to take. Moving on to phase 4, we will work to rebuild local economies, and social dining halls will start to buy food from local farmers. This will help boost revenues for families, and it will focus on culturally relevant foods. Lastly, in phase 5, at least over this year, we will try to strengthen the participation of women in these programs. We will seek out women who are as qualified as possible to take care of these social dining halls and this service. The goal would be to provide more economic independence for women and have them more socially engaged. And we would be recognizing their knowledge and their skills. Essentially, that is what we are trying to do through this Comprehensive Rural Development Roundtable. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Ambassador of the Dominican Republic has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good morning to all representatives. Madam Maritza Frobe, we would like to deeply thank each and every one of the guests for their detailed presentations on food security and institutional security during this very difficult time that we're going through because of COVID-19. For the Dominican Republic, the topic of food security is very important, and we truly appreciate the chair of CD for putting this item on the agenda today. Similarly, approval of the resolution and looking at the challenges in food security in the Americas in the face of COVID-19 and the Guatemala Plan of Action is something that we appreciate. This was approved at the GA, and thanks to Guatemala and all the other member states, for those who participated and co-sponsored this resolution. It's an example of a search for responses for nutrition and food security. At the same time, this underscores multilateral cooperation throughout the region and in this organization itself. Mr. Chairman, this pandemic has underscored the need to have short, medium, long-term strategies to evaluate the current situation as far as concerns food security. These moments are showing us and teaching us that we have to work together and have strategies to improve and preserve natural resources, as well as look for new ways to multiply things for the benefit of all. These kinds of activities are very poignant for the most vulnerable states in our hemisphere, with a view to ensuring well-being for all. Along this line, then, we're looking at the countryside. We are laser focused looking at the life of all Dominicans. And this is an agriculture. We are well aware that agriculture is key for economic recovery and for food security and for creating employment. Similarly, we're giving greater support to our cattle ranchers so that they can do business and they can increase their production, guaranteeing security, or food security, I should say, for now and for the future. In the Dominican Republic, I think that this year, through Decree 6529, the Agricultural Cabinet will try to have agricultural policies which are focused on securing national agricultural productivity and guarantee food security for the Dominican population. The main function will be to discuss public policies and to discuss things with agricultural sector for local consumption as well as exports. This will be so that we have different institutions involved with foodstuffs and other sectors to articulate economic policies that are focused on activities that promote sovereignty and food security in the Dominican Republic. With these kind of tangible activities, we have developed the following initiatives in the last few months. We have 50,000 workshops for plantains for an increase in this product. Production of vegetables has increased by 12 point some odd thousand pounds per month, 20 million this month for growth of 58%. We are spearheading exports of cocoa through a coordinated program with others that take into account more than 61 million pesos for recovery efforts. We're also supporting banana, tobacco, mangoes, and avocados, and other products that are highly demanded. Agriculture is very well organized and highly developed, and it guarantees that we have pork, chicken, and meat. The Agricultural Bank, this is the best show of our government for agriculture. For the small, medium-sized, and large players, a lot of initiatives have been taken. Now, the efficacy of cooperatives has inspired implementing a plan for rural cooperatives and their growth, and they have worked with credit services, processing and harvesting for the small producers, setting up a coordination agency for the agriculture institutions with students have been done so that school programs use national or look at national production and has the participation of all rural cooperatives. Now, as far as concerns the practical aspects, in the face of COVID-19 in the Dominican Republic, the social network has three pillars. First, there are three programs: conditional transfers in human development and social development and social institutions. The network is coordinated by social policy cabinets and is based on working together for economic life. Now, actually, the Dominican Republic is based on setting up a Ministry of Well-being with a view to having other institutions and more institutions in this sector. The second pillar has to do with the idea of protecting people who have participated in the formal labor sector. This will be gradually broadened to cover workers in the affiliated formal sectors. And the third pillar is to provide standards for development and labor standards which are geared toward promoting decent work. We want to formalize contracts, promote collective negotiations, work security, minimum wages, limiting child labor, and avoiding discriminatory practices. COVID-19 has offered us problems in all areas, and we have to be able to grapple with these problems. And these are just some of the measures that we have in the Dominican Republic. In the Dominican Republic, the Commission for the Prevention and Control of Coronavirus, the Commission to deal with economic and employment issues, and another commission to deal with social issues. Now, based on these commissions, we have measures in the following areas: social protection, employment, economics and finance and health. The different mechanisms for social protection through which we protect the well-being of all people and their income are ready to work for many Dominicans, thousands of Dominicans who are participating in these programs for employers and employees, programs that they do at home and other programs. As we look at social protection and social security employment in the face of COVID, there is temporary help, things that can be done at home for first needs, for social safety nets, and other initiatives for homes, particularly for those who are vulnerable in the face of COVID-19. We're looking at people who have had tuberculosis or other conditions. We have other kinds of programs to ensure employment for workers and economic sectors that do temporary work. The government in this case is committed to having assistance for those workers. And we have a program to support temporarily all of the independent gig workers with unconditioned cash transfers, which will allow us to mitigate the economic impact so that we can mitigate COVID-19. The school programs, by handing over food kits and food baskets to schools for children through these state canteens, has handed over a lot of foodstuffs. More than 30,000 people have been benefited through this social plan put by the presidency. And also, we have food kits for children 0 to 5 years of age. We hope that in the future, in the near future, all of this can be left behind. COVID-19 can be left behind. We hope that we can strengthen and learn and put in practice everything that we've learned. We hope to do it together so that we can improve the daily life of everybody, everywhere. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ambassador of Panama has the floor. Ambassador Roosevelt has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director Roberts, the Panama would like to thank the World Food Program and the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation for Agriculture for their very hard work to guarantee food security in our hemisphere, particularly during the pandemic that we're grappling with. And as such, we've taken due note of all of the valuable presentations from Director Barreto, the Sub-Director Day, Minister Vargas, and Director Munoz Pogosian. And at the same time, we also like to thank everybody who has broached this very important topic for all of our people. Now, whilst food security in the face of the pandemic has been a priority on our agenda, as we see in the Guatemala Action Plan, COVID-19 has deepened and increased the challenges in this area and has obliged us to make the necessary adjustments to deal with the situation as is reflected in the resolution approved by the GA in 2020. Challenges for food and nutritional security in the Americas in the face of COVID-19 within the framework of the Guatemala Action Plan. The unexpected, devastating situation that took hold in 2020 because of the pandemic has reiterated the possibility of having full-fledged development, including economic development, given the fact that the entire population has no access to basic needs, sanitation, transport, internet, health, education, food, and drinking water. And in this regard, we have to think things through, and thus it's necessary to focus on public investments in the most marginalized areas and those where there's deeper poverty first, and to uphold what has been achieved, and then to try to slow the deterioration of social indicators. the Ministry of Social Development and the Ministry of Fisheries have programs to promote social capital, and these have a direct impact in the rural areas, which seek to have social inclusion through programs and activities that take into account productive activities for the entire community. In these programs, we would like to highlight some of the territorial networks. Both of our programs would like to strengthen the wherewithal of the community with special attention to rural communities and others. From FAO, with the help of the World Bank, since 2017, Panama has fleshed out the pilot plan to implement a methodology for field schools, support for social issues, and using through this methodology a component for productive inclusion. By mid-2020, we implemented a Panama Agro Solidarity Plan, the aim of which is to support family agriculture. And through this plan, we have had the harvest of small and medium-sized producers in the 6 sectors that give us high consumption. These are incorporated in all of the work that has been prepared and been distributed since the pandemic began. As such, then, we favor the people in the countryside and the population that receives all these vouchers, given the situation that they are living through because of the pandemic, and also in terms of local development. The national government, through the social ministry, implemented the Colmena Plan, which has a main political strategy to eradicate poverty in Panama. This is a strategy that looks at the supply of services from the state, given the demands of the population throughout the entire country. And it has a lot of different pillars. We look at the multidimensional poverty indices, which allows us to have specific information on the conditions by the populations most hard hit, and allows us to zoom in an articulated way all of the action done by the state for those populations that are most needy. So to conclude then, let me just point out that in the midst of all these problems and difficulties, we've had opportunities to grow the agricultural sector through a transformative process using practices and agro-technological ideas, which are geared to diversified agricultural growth that is resilient, adapted to the climate, looking at greenhouse gases and trying to control that. With all of that, we have rural agribusiness, be they family or cooperatives, as a way to improve life in the rural sector and improve possibilities for adding value to production. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Ecuador has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The delegation of Ecuador would like to thank the different panelists for their presentations on the priority of food security and nutrition in our hemisphere. As we saw it in the conceptual note, and in the face of COVID-19, we have had hard-hitting moments for the development of our region. Furthermore, the pandemic has exacerbated inequalities and has underscored the very survival of people, the most vulnerable people, many of whom live in food insecurity. The health crisis has drastically reduced a lot of things and destroyed sources of income of many families. And it has hard hit basic nutrition of families, particularly for pregnant women, children, boys and girls, teenagers, senior citizens, and people with disabilities. And because of their situation and reality, they require different kind of nutrition. In this context, I'd like to underscore the role of the OAS to achieve, for integral development, the topic of food security, which is a priority in the hemispheric agenda. And as such, then, institutions and organizations will continue to work together to strengthen activities. We would also like to underscore the ICA and all the work that member states do for the protection for agricultural communities. Here we're talking about food security and an increase in agriculture. Ecuador has supported the resolution that was approved in the 50th General Assembly on the challenges for food security and nutrition in the Americas in the face of COVID-19 within the frame of the Guatemala Action Plan 2019, which proposes measures to deal with food and nutritional security in the hemisphere. To protect health, to reach and guarantee other aspects, the government of Ecuador created, under an emergency and an exceptional way, nutritional support vouchers or bonds, and we're talking about cash transfers of $240 for the most vulnerable population affected by the pandemic. And similarly, it established family protection bonds because of the presence of COVID-19 with $120 disbursed and has hit 470,000 homes. This is done with a view to support consumption and promote access to buying nutritional products. These networks, discount networks, offer more than 50% for primary goods for the program of safety net programs. We also have other programs for people with disabilities and senior citizens as well. The Ministry of Agriculture, with the support of public institutions as well as private, has fleshed out policies of the state for agro sector for 2020-2030 for the decade of agriculture. This has moved towards strengthening the society, sustainability for the environment, and modernization of all institutions within the legal framework of the country. Subsecretary of Agriculture and Family Countryside Agriculture has promoted learning and capacity building for all producers. And this learning allows them to move from a conventional productive system, monocultures, to one that is sustainable and one that is diversified using local products. We have warehouses for consumption, and we have ways to guarantee production for the farmers so that they can avoid dearth of supply. And as such, then, these small farmers, in the face of COVID-19, will continue to strengthen participation of family agriculture and family farming and protect consumption and food security for all homes, with special attention to these sectors. Cattle growing and agriculture has offered an opportunity to give other kinds of bonds with small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as have other fisheries activities for a host of different activities with Zero Agro programs, which promotes agriculture through increased knowledge and by using innovations and new technologies. To conclude, then, I would like to underscore that given the socioeconomic productive vulnerability for homes, there are projects called Super Mujer Rural, which favors more than 400,000 women and acknowledges their presence in this area. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Ambassador Solano from Costa Rica has the floor. Good morning, everybody. Today, more so than ever, it's very important to talk about the topic that has brought us together here today. And Costa Rica, thus, is very grateful to the chair and very happy to be in this session with excellent presenters who have enriched our knowledge with their outstanding presentations. Given the challenges of the pandemic, which began as a health emergency and has become a global threat on different fronts and has brought to fore grave consequences as we try to move towards sustainable development objectives, Costa Rica has focused on the most vulnerable population, one that has been hardest hit because of COVID-19, and took immediate measures in setting up this protective bond program for the rural areas. The beneficiaries are those people who are unemployed because of the pandemic, with layoffs, reduced work by 50%, and those other independent gig and informal workers. $80 million were handed to more than 160,000 inhabitants, that is to say, favoring their dependents as well, which is 1.8 million people in a population of 5 million people. And given that, we were able to mitigate an increase in poverty between 4.5 percentage points. Now, as of March, the government of Costa Rica presented an economic strategy for the entire country, for an economy which is inclusive and decarbonized 2020-2050. Here we're talking about a blueprint to build in the next 30 years an economy which is decentralized, digitalized, and decarbonized. And we're moving ahead with that. According to a study that was carried out recently on the cost and benefits of decarbonization of the Costa Rican economy, we see that the implementation of this plan for decarbonization will look at $41 million in benefits for the economy of Costa Rica during this time frame. And the rural areas might be the ones that most benefit from this plan, with an improvement of agricultural production and ecosystemic services. This supports ecotourism and the financial value of land that is devoted to forests to capture carbon in the atmosphere. These are measures that produce foodstuffs. Now, in the city, one of the main points is to concentrate on economic space and look at the major metropolitan areas, the major urban areas. And here, this is going to positive effect on millions of areas, in areas such as poverty, unemployment, or employment, innovation, technological education, and we will have productive activities that are increased, taking advantage of and strengthening human capital and all the other resources that are in the different regions to generate employment and other opportunities, and spearhead economic activities that have to do with the green and blue economies that are aligned to decarbonization. Now, for all of that, we propose key actions from 2020 to 2050 based on 5 pillars: infrastructure and connectivity, human capital, social inclusion, economic development, and decarbonization. And these programs are thanks to the financing from international cooperation, which is more than $16.5 million, and will support the implementation of all of the strategies for 5 years. The country has 12 main initiatives which were established beforehand to look at poverty. 1, development. The first development aspect is a national strategy to reduce poverty and social inequality through a process which is multi-sectoral and interinstitutional, looking at 2 dimensions: well-being, which will guarantee satisfying all the basic needs in a cycle of life, looking at multidimensionality of poverty, and through which there will be a host of different activities and actors, both public and private. The second is opportunities for change, which represents a management of soils, which will lead to a host of different other opportunities for families to pivot. With these initiatives, we have the bridge to agriculture. Here we're looking at the agricultural sector in the rural countryside for 2020-2029, geared towards reduction of poverty with different kinds of activities to promote economic independence and entrepreneurship of rural homes. The next project will begin on the 5th of April and seeks to have ministers from the agricultural and cattle growing sectors. And here we're looking at more than 200 productive homes, which are located in 7 different districts of Bruja and the Caribbean coast, with a view to improving life quality for these families. There will be production and market chains. And here we're going to have an impact and dynamize the economies in these areas and bringing them together through productive activities. The National System for Information and the Sole Registry for Well-Being aims to have a database which is updated with information from the people. And this requires attention from the state or subsidies to find or pinpoint poverty and extreme poverty. The state is available with information so that we can better zoom in with these programs that mean a highlight on these sectors and equitable distribution of resources. Looking at these systems, we have coverage and attention paid by the OAS, and we have 3/4 of the population that is involved. We hope to have a rapid delivery of some of the monetary transfers as well for those people who have been hard hit and have lost their incomes because of COVID-19. In December last year, we had the Prize for Innovation from the OAS. This recognized the transformation of the people through their system as related to social programs, the use of differentiating aspects, and protection of data, contributing as such to the real transparency and more active social participation. And then lastly, Mr. Chairman, Costa Rica, as a PPT and given it's a member of SICA, we have a plan that systematically looks at food security and nutrition. And in this area, we would like to spearhead an agenda with an emphasis on human development and other activities that improve agricultural production, the use of technology in agriculture and cattle rearing, and improve sustainable capacity and development with specialized organizations such as ICA, INCAI, and FAO, so that we have accessible foodstuffs. And particularly, we would like to underscore the role played by small producers, family producers, farmers, cattle ranchers, fish growers to combat the pandemic and to help with nutrition and foodstuffs. So in keeping with the goals in the family decade 20 to 2029 proposed by Costa Rica, we have representation in the FAO and from the Vice Presidency of our groups and the Inter-American Commission on Social Development and Employment. Costa Rica will continue to work tirelessly to implement the objectives sought. We truly appreciate everything, and we will continue to accompany all the work done by member states everywhere and look at all of the work that is being done. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks and greetings to everybody.
La palabra.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Director Robé, Ambassador Claverie, for your leadership, and thank you for putting the critical topic of food security and nutrition on today's agenda. I would also like to thank the panelists who have given us a better understanding of the importance of this issue and how it impacts the region. The United States agrees that food security is an issue that we must work together to address. I would like to highlight a few of our successes in promoting food security and nutrition in the region. Feed the Future is the United States Global Hunger and Food Security Initiative. Employing a whole-of-government approach, Feed the Future draws on the resources and expertise of multiple U.S. government agencies, including the U.S. Agency for International Development, the U.S. Department of State, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Feed the Future is very active in our hemisphere. Through development efforts that address the root causes of poverty and hunger, Feed the Future has partnered with many of you here today to help reduce poverty by an average of 23% across the globe. This translates to 23.4 million people living above the poverty line. USDA manages the McGovern-Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition and the local and regional food aid procurement program, which provide for school meals in Latin America. When schools closed due to COVID-19, USDA programming pivoted to provide over 6,000 metric tons of US donated and locally procured food to approximately 180,000 school-aged children and their families in Latin America and the Caribbean. USDA also promotes food security by managing fellowships and scientific exchanges for experts in developing and middle-income countries, which facilitate lasting global relationships and promote bilateral trade cooperation. The US government is committed to improving food security globally and in our hemisphere. We fund approximately 40% of the World Food Program and 22% of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. We recently announced a pledge of $129 million to the International Fund for Agricultural Development, making the United States its largest donor. These organizations provide take-home food rations, vouchers, and cash to food insecure families across the hemisphere. They help governments strengthen social safety net programs, promote sustainable food systems to provide healthy diets for all, and work on inclusive rural employment and improving resilience in agriculture sectors across the region. Unfortunately, this past year has seen the COVID-19 pandemic threaten to erode the hard-fought gains of our past programming. In addition to immediate challenges, the pandemic poses serious long-term implications to food security, striking at the heart of both markets and institutional systems that allow for continuous access to services, nutritious food, and clean water. The agriculture industry is a critical source of food, income, and jobs in our hemisphere. Restrictions on movement can make it difficult for farmers to do their jobs and obtain supplies, affecting agricultural production across the region. This is particularly true for vulnerable and overlooked groups like smallholder farmers, who have an outsized impact on safe and nutritious food production and availability. These challenges also disproportionately impact women who not only act as caregivers, but are also major contributors to farm labor and management of communal water sources. I will close by mentioning an upcoming opportunity for cooperation. The UN Food Systems Summit is taking place during the Nutrition for Growth Year of Action and will culminate in a head of state level summit in September 2021. The UN Food Systems Summit is an opportunity to develop bold ideas and actions to help transform food systems, to eradicate global hunger, and deliver good jobs and good nutrition for all. In preparation, I know many of you are convening local food systems dialogues to help transformative solutions. The United States is excited to engage with you on these local dialogues in whatever way is most helpful to you. We ask that you reach out to us if you are interested in more details. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Ofrezco la palabra.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the delegate of Chile. Chair, thank you. The COVID-19 pandemic has left no aspect of daily life untouched. As our speaker said, food and nutrition have been hit hard. The availability and accessibility of food and the production of food have also been hit by this as well. It has led to lockdowns, a decrease in families' purchasing power due to the depression, and a lack of access to healthy and safe food, especially for the most vulnerable groups. This has changed food habits. It has led to ways in the way that we acquire foods, as well as prepare and consume foods. For most of the population, this pandemic has led to sedentarism, less access to healthy food, and difficulty accessing food, school, and supplementary food access programs. This means that there's less food available and lower quality food available. That is high calorie foods, foods with saturated fats and added sugar, which is the exact opposite of what we have said about the importance of having access to a balanced diet as a way to offset the worst impacts of COVID-19. So, as a result of this context, we have seen exacerbated food inequalities in the region. Chair, during these crises, we have to strengthen our regional systems to make them more sustainable and more healthy. In doing so, we have to foster production and supply. It is now more important than ever to see collaboration among our countries. But we also need to strengthen ties between different agencies and stakeholders in the agricultural and food chains, because there are issues that are affecting the most vulnerable populations, and this could reach the whole population. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. I give the floor to Brazil was there. Well, then we'll move on to Colombia. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Chair. Good morning or good afternoon to all. Chair, to start off, I would like to express my thanks for the inclusion of this topic on today's agenda. It's a very relevant topic. With your permission, I would like to give the floor on behalf of Colombia to Mr. Javier Pinilla. He is an economist and the head of the Ministry of Agriculture, and he is in charge of the ministry's program that provides access to food and controls coordination for food security and nutritional security in Colombia. Chair, so with your permission, I will give the floor to Mr. Javier Pinilla. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. The contributions of the panelists who have participated in this event have been very important. It's also been important to hear about the experiences from all of the countries. We just wanted to tell you briefly what Colombia's experience has been with this and what the intersectoral strategy has been in Colombia to face the COVID-19 crisis. This crisis that has had a negative impact on us over the last year. In Colombia, essentially, we have a four-pronged strategy. The first strategy is production and availability of food. To improve in that area, we have financed farmers and awarded them loans. We have also provided access to supplies or even subsidized agricultural inputs. We have lifted corn, soy, and sorghum tariffs as well. We have sought out strategies to avoid supply shortages, and we have done this by monitoring our supply on a weekly basis for hundreds of products in the basic family food basket. We are in touch on an ongoing basis with almost 1,000 stores located all over the country. We have provided support for logistics, which includes transportation and storage, as well as distribution. And we've coordinated all this through our different related ministries and entities. We've seen participation from the Colombian Institute of Family Well-Being, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, presidential panels, and we have seen ongoing involvement from the President of the Republic, our president being Mr. Ivan Duque. And we have worked with Maria Juliana Ruiz. For food production, we have incorporated contract-based farming models, which have sought to reduce intermediaries in food production. The goal of this has to bring food products from farm to table. We've carried out 130,000 transactions over the last 12 to 18 months, and as a result of those transactions, we have had an impact on one of the areas that one of our colleagues talked to us about just a little while ago. That is that we have had a positive impact on the lives of rural women. We are carrying out operations with rural women, campesino women, women heads of household, and we are empowering them. We've also worked with rural public goods by rehabilitating infrastructure in order to provide support for our rural farmers. We have implemented programs for the storage of rice, corn, and other crops. We have worked with farmers who have been impacted by climate change, such as by the hurricanes Eta and Iota, which were already mentioned at this meeting. Those had an effect on our islands, San Andres and Providencia. We are working to rebuild those islands on an ongoing basis. We focus on the agricultural sector as well as the fishing sector. We've tried to deliver certified seeds for different crops, corn. We have provided equipment for cold chains, biosecurity kits. We've worked with cotton, beef production. We have worked to mitigate the climate phenomena that affect our region and avoid freezes that affect us at the beginning of the year. This year has been no exception, and that has only exacerbated problems in agriculture. We have worked to avoid problems feeding our population, which, as we all know, has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We have worked on food sales. We have been purchasing beef for the people. We have a public procurement law, which is regulated by the national government and the Ministry of Agriculture. The goal of this being to minimize the cost of food so that we can ensure food and nutritional security. We have worked on marketing channels, especially for family agriculture. We have made temporary adjustments to payment for certain foods so that we can subsidize them, or so that we can in some way have a positive impact on supply shortages or excessive demand, or the opposite. We have worked based on environmental criteria. We're working with agroecological products and farmers. We're working to improve the biosecurity of our farmers so that we can mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in the agriculture and livestock sector. We have established premiums for agricultural services. The essence is to provide physical access to food products. The Ministry of Education, the Institute of Family Well-Being, and other institutes have worked to create reinforced family food baskets and have delivered those baskets throughout the whole country. 14.5 million baskets had been delivered as of the end of last year. The strategy involves delivering food baskets door to door, that is, household by household. We try to reach all families with these basic food baskets. We have set up temporary programs to replace school food programs since school has gone virtual in many cases. We have been concerned about the fact that children need to have sufficient nutritional intake for their proper development. And in some cases, given adverse effects of different kinds of the pandemic in the region, such as the fact that it's affected families' jobs and incomes, 36.6 million rations have been provided to those children per month. We have provided services to different populations, understanding the differences between them, our Afro-descendant populations, indigenous populations. We have taken into account ancestral traditions related to nutrition in those communities. There's an extremely important program which is a key focus for the First Lady of Colombia, Maria Juliana Ruiz, and that is the Action Plan Against Malnutrition. We call it the Not One More Plan. 11 out of the 32 departments in Colombia are enrolled in this plan, which means that we're reaching more than around 30% of the country's territory, and we're working to fight childhood malnutrition, be it moderate or severe. We're working on therapeutic formulas that can be consumed. I'm sorry, Mr. Pinilla, in the interest of time, I would ask you if we could wrap up our remarks soon. I know that I've gone on for a little while. I'll summarize what I have to say. This program is very important for the First Lady. We're having a positive impact through it. We're ensuring access to food and water, which is key throughout this crisis. We're working through the Department of Social Prosperity and the Ministries of Science and Technology to launch programs to do the same thing. We're promoting food and nutritional practices. And this is actually the third strategy, the third prong of our strategy to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to do this, we're providing food and nutritional education, which includes our guide to easy access foods in the region. We've provided guidelines on how to provide food for households throughout the pandemic. We're working on technical guidelines and biosecurity protocols in order to improve breastfeeding, which is so key at this time. We're working to reduce the quantity of sodium in foods. We are updating different kinds of guidelines, and we're trying to overcome hunger in children. Our last prong is institutions and public policies to fight malnutrition. We have a 2018-2022 program, which includes a nutrition component. And there are different multi-level government interventions related to malnutrition. We're actually working on a new bill in order to change our food and nutrition commissioned to make it larger and so that it can have a bigger impact at the national level. We'll change its name. We're currently evaluating how we'll do that. We're looking at the policies that we would need to pass to provide the right to food. We're working on a very important public policy about food waste. And I will leave it off there. I thank you greatly for the opportunity to speak to you and for the knowledge that we have all shared today, especially the panelists. And I would also like to thank the chair of this venue from the Republic of Colombia. We thank you for holding this important meeting. Thank you, Mr. Pinillo. I would like to give the floor to Barbados.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, colleagues. My delegation would like to thank the presenters today for their informative and interesting presentations on this important topic of food security, which is of great importance to my country. And with that, I would like to hand you over to an official of our Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, Dr. Kaylee Holder, who's our Chief Agriculture Officer, who would make an intervention on behalf of our delegation. Thank you. If Ms. Dr. Holder can request the floor, thank you.
Adelante.
Chair, thank you for organizing this meeting of the CIDI, and thank you for having me. Warm greetings from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security in Barbados. The pandemic has had a significant impact on Barbados's economy and by extension, our food and nutrition security, specifically the disruption of global food supply chains due to logistical challenges and trade restrictions by major food exporters has underscored for Barbados the critical need to increase local agricultural production in order to enhance our food and nutrition security. Early last year, in anticipation of the likely food scarcity and hike in the prices of food imports, which represent 80% of our food requirements, my ministry implemented an emergency plan to increase production, ensure consistent supply of fresh, safe, and nutritious food, and also save valuable foreign exchange. I'm pleased to report that our farmers responded positively to the call for increased agricultural production. Crop production for the period of January to December 2020 rose by 9% compared to the corresponding period in 2019. In fact, the agricultural sector was the only sector which showed growth during 2020, with a modest output that was 1.9% more than in 2019. The ministry has also received favorable response to the Farmers Empowerment and Enfranchisement Drive called FEED. This is a project that started in 2019, and the objective of this FEED project are to provide land for lease and training to new farmers to encourage greater participation and output in crop production and livestock rearing. In addition, the government has recently engaged in a private-public partnership whereby urban farmers will likewise have the opportunity to also access land for lease and training, but will additionally be linked to a buyer that will guarantee purchase of a fixed amount of produce. My ministry will certainly wish to maintain this momentum that has been created by these initiatives. However, while these initiatives have the potential to advance our food and nutrition security agenda, we recognize only too well that there are still a number of challenges which have been hindering our advances over the years. That must be urgently addressed if we are to achieve sustainable food and nutrition security. To keep the momentum going, we must increase our agricultural productivity, because it is widely agreed that the main contributor to agricultural growth and competitiveness has been increased productivity arising from innovation and changes in technology. In fact, we note that in food-secure countries, agricultural productivity has nearly tripled in the last 60 years, which has enabled continuing growth in farm output, even as land and labor have declined by 28% and 76% respectively. And this has largely been as a result of investment in public and private agricultural research. Certainly, public investment in agricultural research has resulted in large economic benefits, with annual rates of returns between 20 and 60%, making it good business for governments. However, the new technologies or practices only have their intended impact when farmers adopt the new skills or techniques, and this is where extension comes in. Successful innovations have spread rapidly across the farm sector, aided by a system of public extension that delivers information and expertise to farmers. Currently, agricultural research, development, and extension is fragmented and uncoordinated in Barbados, and this is underpinned by a declining number of agricultural experts lost to retirement who have not been replaced by young professionals. Our ministry is now looking to turn this negative trend around with a vision to unite and optimize the agricultural sector and place Barbados firmly on a track of sustainable food and nutrition security. To this end, we are looking to introduce digital technologies and precision agricultural technologies to transform the entire agricultural chain. We are looking to increase farmers' access to water from wastewater treatment plants, given that we are ranked as the 16th most water-scarce country in the world, to improve soil organic matter, and we are also looking to introduce new innovations in small-scale mechanical equipment, introduce more climate-resilient varieties and breeds, specifically as it relates to drought resistance and pest-resistant crops, as well as heat-tolerant livestock breeds. Furthermore, we will also be looking to increase natural predators and integrated pest management solutions, as well as to introduce innovations in post-harvest management and minimally agro-processed technologies that preserve the quality of agricultural goods that we supply to the nation. I'd like to thank you very much for allowing us this time to present on Barbados's behalf. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Peru has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The permanent representation of Peru would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having included this topic on the agenda of our meeting this morning. We have identified quite a few areas for member states to cooperate, and thus, for the delegation of Peru, we are happy to have the participation of the Minister of Development and Social Development in my country. And through the Bracero program, this is a very important contribution. We would also like to say that we thank the presenters for their presentations and particularly underscore Mr. Barreto's program, or I should say his presentation. We would like to offer warm greetings to everyone. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, and with your green light, we'd like to give the floor to our minister responsible for zero hunger in the country. Thank you very much. Be welcome. You have the floor. You have the floor. I'd like to greet you on behalf of Zero Hunger. This is a set of comments on behalf of the short government that we have, and looking at the articulation of different sectors of the government, there's a an agenda, given some of the background information, and in keeping with Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, and also in the face of COVID-19 and the food situation that we have and the current national program where we have strategic actors throughout the country with the organization of civil society as well, and the host of different strategic actors to move ahead and grapple with the crisis that we have. We have prioritized certain areas throughout the country. This is in the face of a crisis because of COVID-19, and we have priority areas, 108 priority areas. What does it mean to have food security and nutrition for us? It means land ownership. It means the geophysical conditions for the agricultural sector, development for agricultural production, availability of conditions and health, the health system, access to basic needs, and land ownership. All of these components have come together with or under the scene that we are dealing with and have called for a host of different changes. And this has meant that we have had a strategy for the entire country that we're working with, a governmental articulation with different permanent ongoing activities. We've got the Secretariat, the CCM, the Technical Secretariat of CS, where we've got the Technical Secretariat and a working group to implement Zero Hunger. We are mapping out and defining all of the processes and bringing in all of the different organizations looking at food security. We're doing this on a local level. We work with the local entities and the local authorities, the management committees for food programs, and the Council for the Administrative of other programs as well. We have three components which are well defined for Zero Hunger. One is productive development, where we have 4 different pillars for our intervention. Component 2, food support and the delivery of foodstuffs and food baskets and vouchers. And 3, vertical articulation. This is throughout the country, I should say. Can you share my PPT, please, my PowerPoint presentation? I'm not a technical guru here, says the speaker. Very well. Next slide, please. Here's a bit on the background that I was talking about before. Next slide. We've got number 2, evidence. Given the national policies for social development, here we've got the map of vulnerability given food insecurity. We've got a map of the greatest vulnerable areas in the departments, provinces, and districts. We also have established priorities in different regions. 7 regions that are priority, 51 provinces and 188 districts. These are all prioritized. And in Ayacucho and Huancavelica, we focus on the central area of the country, and in Loreto, the east, Lima and Callao is another territorial area. I was just saying that these are all the components involved in food security, and that has caused a revolution in a change in all of the components in food security. And this leads us to see how we deal with our roadmap for all of the stakeholders that are involved here. food, or I should say landholders, landowners, the health system, the productive infrastructure and availability of foodstuffs, education, nutritional education and health systems, and so on. In sum, zero hunger is what we have here. But I would like to invite you to reflect a little bit about all of this. When you hear zero hunger, what does it mean? Does it mean a revolution of sorts? In Brazil, there's a program, and it was spearheaded by a private initiative, and then there was a public policy. We have El Salvador, Chile, Honduras with programs, and we have our own intervention for zero hunger. And this is an action from the Peruvian state side to deal with the challenges of food insecurity. And when I speak about a revolution, we're talking about pulling together all of the areas and the provision of resources for the least favored or the disadvantaged populations. There's a strategy for the entire country from bottom up and top down. We look at the local governments as the main stakeholders or the main players in the interaction, and we look for good territorial governance and also look at the national pillars. We have the local governments, the national governments, well, that work in zero hunger throughout the country. The idea is to contribute to the reduction in the gaps of food insecurity for the entire population, the most vulnerable population, I should add, and these are the components and some of the results and the lines of action or the lines of intervention. So the first is to increase the productive capacity and provide foodstuffs for the population in most vulnerable homes. We would like to improve access and have sufficient food for the people in homes that are most vulnerable on a national level, and then also we'd like to move on and improve our management. We'd like to pull together all of the efforts for all of the sectors, all of the local governments. Now here, you've got lines of intervention in the middle column, and here we are intervening in technical assistance to strengthen capacities, that is capacity building and productive knowledge. We are looking at family structures. We've got access to productive assets, development of the productive infrastructure, and development of social infrastructure as well. We work with these people for the provision of water and so that they can have better access to water through the Ministry of Production. We've got programs for fisheries and other programs, as well as state procurement. And the Ministry of Housing and Sanitation is involved with providing access to local housing in the productive sector, social productive sector. We're talking about monetary transfers here. And I heard one of my colleagues mention this provision of foodstuffs and food baskets and other foodstuffs. So there we pull everything together through the ministries of the different ministries, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Production, and the Ministry of the Environment. And then thirdly, we try to generate and build capacity for multi-actor platforms and governance throughout the countries. And this is one of the strongest areas because we have had to identify the opportunities to articulate things with the national government, the regional, and the local governments. This has created opportunities, and so we have been able to identify what we have to do and also provide technical assistance to strengthen the regional and local governments. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's very, very late, and this is a long presentation, so we still have 2 other items on our agenda to deal with, and we are going to lose interpretation. Okay, well, thank you very much. Go ahead, please, with the next slide. Please go ahead with the next slide. Next slide. I'm going to round off my presentation with this slide, which is the articulation, that is to say, the sum total of all efforts being made throughout the country. The government, the Ministry of Social Inclusion, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Production, the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Production. And they all work together so that they can flesh out a model for territorial articulation with the local governments and the national governments, or the national level governments. And there is local oversight pulling together all the efforts made by the private sector, the NGOs, and this is done through different activities, different donations, and a host of different activities for everybody that's present, and particularly for the canteens for the most vulnerable sectors. Next slide, and with that I'm going to round off. Right now we've implemented this model of markets for foodstuffs, where the private sector, through Canadian assistance, have been able to finance these sustainable markets. We have benefited the family agriculturists, the family farmers, and right now we have urban gardens as well as canteens. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to the delegation of Brazil. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Chairman, I would like to first thank the chair for the initiative to include this topic, this very important topic, on our agenda. Also, I should like to thank the Ministers of Development and Social Inclusion from Peru, Mr. Vargas, Winsley, and the other presenters from ICA and the Department of Social Inclusion from the OAS. Today's discussion underscores some of the food nutrition challenges in the Americas in the face of COVID-19 and the Plan of Action of Guatemala adopted at the last General Assembly, given the initiative of Guatemala and with the co-sponsorship of Brazil. Looking at things like this and to evaluate, we have seen how things have been implemented thus far, as well as gives us an opportunity to think about certain lines of action for future progress to be made, and particularly it offers us a valuable opportunity to dialogue and to share our experiences and best practices when it comes to implementing policies or national initiatives. As the presentations that we have heard this morning, and as has been highlighted, we're talking about a large part of the society in our region, and unfortunately, we have worked for decades in nutrition and food security, and the issue becomes now even much more worrisome in the face of the pandemic. So by and large, the PMA deserves our attention. And it plays a crucial role as a catalyzer of efforts to preserve food security and to help rural farmers during and after the pandemic. Mr. Chairman, I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to share some of the initiatives taken on by Brazil to guarantee food security and nutritional security of Brazilians, given the social, economic, and health problems that have been provoked or caused because of the pandemic. Some of the lines is the transfer of income for the most vulnerable families, Bolsa Familia, emergency assistance, and some of the other activities to uphold employment for workers, emergency programs to keep jobs and keep income. The Brazilian government also promoted a broadening of resources, more resources for food programs with a view to purchasing more foodstuffs from family farms. And institutions have also worked, in addition to donations of food baskets for indigenous populations and other vulnerable populations. But before I conclude, let me just point out that the Brazilian government also has had a voluntary program to fight the virus with social action, which are geared towards most vulnerable populations and also to purchase food. Some of the strategies that I've mentioned also contribute to keep production going, keep supply going, to market and consume foodstuffs in Brazil during the pandemic, and to a good extent in other countries in the region as well, taking into account the export capacity that Brazil had to export foodstuffs. Brazil is very interested in this discussion and the cooperation in the OAS on this topic that we've been talking about today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Brazil for that set of comments. And I'd like to thank all delegations who stuck to the time, or as we have no other representatives who wish to make comments at this time, and having heard the very interesting comments and presentations on this topic, I should like to suggest that CD take due note of all of the presentations made from these invited guests, as well as comments and points made by delegations. We agree to work together to strengthen technical cooperation amongst member states, utilizing the mechanisms that the OAS has, such as the Inter-American Social Protection Network, WIPSO, and promote an exchange of information and knowledge and lessons learned with all public policies amongst all member states, and to boost efforts to motivate member states, permanent observers, and other donors to contribute with the necessary resources to implement all of the activities that we have borne in mind and that are included in the Guatemala Plan of Action and other cooperation and technical assistance activities to deal with the serious consequences of hunger and malnutrition in the Americas because of COVID-19. And number 5, to continue encouraging the General Secretariat through the Secretariat for Access to Rights and Equity in cooperation with SETI and other relevant secretariats to continue to strengthen coordination with other stakeholders such as the World Food Program, United Nations, FAO, ICA, and the Institute for Research and Agricultural Development of the Caribbean, CARDI, in addition to others, so that we can implement more projects, boost hemispheric cooperation geared toward dealing with the serious effects of the pandemic and food security in the region. As there are no objections, then it is so. Agreed. Agreed. Once again, I'd like to express my deep gratitude and thanks to all of the esteemed and distinguished invited guests who have come together with us to talk about this topic this morning. Let us move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is consideration of the draft Inter-American Business Charter. This refers to the mandate given to us by the GA through AG Res 2954, adopted in October last year, to prepare a report of the working group on Inter-American Business Charter. The chair of the group has circulated this report, and I'd like to ask that it be distributed so that it can be offered to all delegations, and as such, they can then flesh out their comments. Now, there are no comments then. We would, Ambassador Luz de Caballo has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just one brief comment on this particular topic. My delegation is grateful for the report of the working group to prepare the draft Inter-American Business Charter, as well as all of the work done to move ahead on the decision in this document that took us a long time to discuss and which my country agreed to. Let me go back and underscore very briefly what we have done. For Mexico, the business charter is a non-binding legal document that should basically aim to strengthen the commitment and the responsibility shouldered by business for sustainable development. that will spearhead our states to act in the United Nations. It should underscore the people, human rights, labor rights, business integrity, responsibility for the environment, and the fight against corruption. Those are the main points. They should be center stage. And as such, Mexico feels it's necessary to take into account the report on human rights, Inter-American Standards and Human Rights, which is prepared by the Special Rapporteurship on Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. My delegation hopes to see the draft that will be circulated by the chair and which will be presented where we trust will reflect all of the deep-seated topics so that we can have a easy negotiation process. In particular, I should like to ask the chair to draft a very specific, well-defined objective document, both in the preambular as well as the operative sections, in reasonable time so that our authorities have a chance to peruse the document properly. Thus far, the meetings have been many, they've been often, and we've had very little time to analyze the documents. And this situation has made it difficult to come up with a response inasmuch as the pandemic has added on other constraints. And that's why, once again, we should like to ask the chair to take these limitations into consideration. We appreciate the chair for all of the work that has been done in negotiating this draft. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Once again, I'd like to thank the chair of the working group and ask that it be circulated. Let me thank you once again for all of the work that has been done and encourage you to circulate it so delegations can opine. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next item on our agenda. CD, Inter-American Ministerial Meeting. And the topic here refers to consideration and approval of the 21st Inter-American Conference of Ministers of Labor preliminary draft agenda. And as you will recall, during the CD meeting held last year, the Minister of Employment, Social Security, Mr. Maroney, presented a proposal from that country on the aforementioned topics from the conference. And this is going to be held in September this year in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Without further ado, let me just say that everybody will be able to offer their comments up until the 31st of March. We've not received any proposals thus far, and thus I'd like to put before you for your consideration the preliminary draft agenda. Under document CD, Doc 311/21, this preliminary draft includes all of the issues and procedures that establishes the rules and regulations for the city for their sectoral meetings, as well as the proposal for the topics presented by the delegation of Argentina on the aforementioned points. I'd like to give the floor to delegations who might like to make comments on this document. And there are no comments, then let's adopt the preliminary draft for the 21st Inter-American Conference of Ministers of Labor. Approved. Item 5 on the agenda, other business. We have finished our consideration of the topics, and thus I'd like to give the floor to delegations if you'd like to make any further comments under other business. Ambassador of Mexico has the floor. As chair of the Inter-American Commission of Tourism, Sector, would like to thank the members for their participation at the third regular meeting on the 26th of March, as well as the presence of Italy as chair of its organization. A lot of important agreements were made, such as to work towards a consensus through harmonizing the protocols on health and to work with the private sector to flesh out one sole technological tool that will facilitate reactivation of tourism and trips in a very safe way. My delegation truly appreciates the participation of more than 130 experts from 30 countries, and we hope that the agreements taken will contribute to recovering the tourist sector in the hemisphere. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The chair is muted. I'm so sorry, says the chairman. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I truly appreciate your comments. Chile has the floor. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, Mr. Chairman. As chair of the Migratory Issues Committee, let me just tell you that this afternoon's meeting, which was scheduled for 2:30, will now begin at 3 in the afternoon. That's all I have to say, and thank you very much for the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I apologize also for going over a little bit. As there are no further points to consider, we would like to round off this meeting and adjourn it, and let me thank all of you. Have a great day. Meeting is adjourned.